The knight in shining armor, the protector of the weak and helpless, the holy avenger. The paladin is a class that invokes certain imagery when it is mentioned, usually resembling some kind of heavily armored knight in full plate, using the divine powers of their deity to smite their foes and drive evil itself from the land. Welcome back, travelers. I'm glad to see you made it. I'm Kolo, and today we're going to be talking about the Paladin class in Baldur's Gate 3. We're going to be taking an in-depth look into all the skills and abilities you'll earn as you level up with your Paladin, as well as each specific subclass so you know what each one of those offers you. In this video, I will be using a bunch of information and images from the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki at bg3.wiki. Those guys over there do a really good job setting up and maintaining the site. I highly recommend you check them out. I'm going to leave a link to the wiki in the video description below. Definitely show them some love. They do really good work. Now, let's get started with character creation. As soon as you choose the Paladin class, when you're creating your character, you're going to gain proficiency with all weapons, all armor, and shields. So you can pretty much use anything. This also means that you don't need to get these proficiencies from your race. Just look through the races and decide for yourself whatever race you want to be. If you see something, if you want to be a halfling paladin and you think that looks cool, go for it, make one. If you want to be a half-orc paladin, make one. The game's not going to hold you back for doing that. There are races that are probably optimal, but play what you want. Once you've chosen your race, you'll be able to start looking over the first level class bonuses that the paladin gets. First of all, the Divine Sense ability. This is a bonus action ability that will grant you advantage on attack rolls against celestials, fiends, and undead for 2 turns. Your paladin can cast this on themselves once per short rest, and there are quite a few instances in the game where this could come in handy. I don't think you're going to regret having it. You'll probably put this to pretty good use. Secondly, you'll get the Lay on Hands class ability. This is a short-range heal that can be used to either heal the target for a small amount, use more Lay on Hands charges, which is the resource you use to cast this. If you use more charges, you can cast a bigger heal. Or instead of healing somebody, you can alternatively choose to cure them of all diseases and poisons. Each time you cast this ability, it's going to let you pick which version of it you want to cast, so just use it as needed. Lay on Hands is great. You're going to love having this, and you will use this tons of times throughout the entire game. The heal that it provides you is very, very respectable. You're going to be using this heal for a long time. The Paladin will also be required to choose an oath to which they will swear their loyalty. The different oaths are the Paladin's subclasses. These are the Oath of the Ancients, Oath of Devotion, and Oath of Vengeance. Each oath has a list of tenets that you must uphold as a Paladin during your adventures, and will provide you with unique divine powers because of the oath that you swore. If during your travels you perform an action that violates the tenets of the oath you swore, you're likely going to run into this sweetheart. The Oathbreaker Knight. You see, the Paladin has 3 oaths that constitute their subclasses, but they actually have 4 subclasses. The 4th being the Oathbreaker. This subclass is for anyone who accidentally violates an oath, violates it on purpose, anyone who just doesn't want to be bound by the rules of an oath, whatever it is. If you want freedom from your restrictive oath, break it, become an Oathbreaker. It's a perfectly viable way to play the game. You can't choose to make an Oathbreaker Paladin at character creation. You have to pick one of the 3 oaths and then break it if you wish to be an Oathbreaker. Then you'll have to go back to camp, do a long rest. The Oathbreaker Knight will show up in your camp. He'll talk to you and he'll explain the situation about what's going on with your new subclass. If you break the oath, there's also ways to undo it, which we'll talk about later. It's not that big of a deal. Paladins earn something at pretty much every level, which makes each level feel really nice and special because you always feel like you're just a few experience points away from something new and cool. So the way we're going to break this down in this video is I'm going to go through all the generic Paladin levels where each subclass gets the same stuff, And then after covering all the basic Paladin levels, we will go back to the beginning and I'll cover the subclass specific bonuses individually. That way we can tell which subclass is giving you what and when you're going to get it. Let's get to it. When you hit second level on a Paladin, you're going to be offered another very important choice, which is your fighting style. These fighting styles are passive buffs that affect your Paladin depending on what kind of gear they're using, and they include things like defense, which will grant you a +1 bonus to your armor class if your Paladin's wearing any armor. This is always a safe bet. If you're not sure which one to pick, you're perfectly fine to just choose defense, and then for the entirety of the game, you'll have this +1 bonus to your armor class. You'll never regret that. That's always a good choice to make, and all it requires is that your Paladin is wearing some kind of armor. And as we said before, the Paladin is usually wearing full plate armor or at least some kind of armor. I'm sure there's a naked Paladin running around out there that is about to message me in the comments. Put some clothes on, bro. Put some clothes on before you get in these comments. Nobody wants to see that. The next fighting style, dueling, will provide you with a +2 bonus to any damage rolls when you hit with a one-handed weapon while not using a weapon in your offhand. So, as long as you're either using a one-handed weapon in your main hand and nothing in your offhand, or if you're using a shield, that's also fine, then you'll gain this +2 bonus to your damage rolls, which can be an insane damage increase, because if you're using a weapon that hits for 10 damage, 2 additional damage is 20% added. If you're hitting with a weapon that deals 20 damage, which is good in this game, then 2 extra damage is still a 10% buff. That's huge. That's a big deal. So this will be good the entirety of the game. This +2 damage doesn't seem like much. This is massive. Especially at low levels, it's ridiculous. You could be doing like massive amounts of bonus damage. The next fighting style, Great Weapon Fighting, is an option for players that want to use a two-handed weapon, which is also a perfectly viable choice. The difference between this and dueling is that dueling increases the damage you do directly. This one's more of a luck-based thing where it's kind of, instead of an increase to your damage, it's more of a bad luck protection. The way it works is this. When you land a hit with a two-handed weapon, if you roll a 1 or a 2 for how much damage that hit is going to do, the game will re-roll that die one time and then use the new roll for the damage roll. So is it possible that you roll 2 1s in a row, or a 1 and then a 2, or a 2 and then a 1? Yes, it is. It's very, very rare for that to happen, and this just kind of gives you a do-over on a bad roll. You could still roll a bad roll again, twice. It will happen, but the odds of it happening twice in a row are much lower than the odds of them happening once. Anything in the game that will allow you to re-roll a bad roll is good. Having that safety net, excellent. The final fighting style, Protection. This one is very, very different from the rest. The rest of them, all you have to worry about is what gear you're wearing, basically. And then after that point, the passive ability just does its own thing. You set it and forget it. You never think about it again. Protection, like I said, is its own animal. If your Paladin is using a shield, they see an enemy attacking one of your allies while they're standing within 5 feet of that ally, then your Paladin can throw up the shield and try to block the attack. And what it actually does in game terms is it imposes disadvantage on the attack roll against your ally. In theory, this is a cool idea. Your Paladin sees someone getting ready to attack your ally and they're like, no way, dude, and they jump up and throw the shield up and try to block their friend. It makes sense. That's what Paladins do in movies and shows. That's what your Paladin does. You're the holy defender, dude. You're there to jump in front of the arrows to protect your teammates. The problem is, in practice, this ability requires that you be standing within 5 feet of one of your allies, while also in line of sight of an enemy that's attacking that person, while also wearing a shield. It also requires a reaction to use. I forgot to mention that. So you also have to have a reaction available on top of it. There's a lot of stuff going on with this. It's very, very difficult to play around. I'm sure somebody out there swears by playing a protection paladin, but man, I find this really hard to recommend because of how tough it is to actually get use out of this. If you're playing a sword and board character that's using a shield anyway, you could take dueling and get a +2 damage roll to every hit you land with your weapon. At all times, no questions asked, +2 damage. Or, if you're wearing armor, which you probably are, you could take defense and get a +1 AC bonus. Flat, +1 armor class. It's really hard for me to recommend protection over one of these other things. So anyway, just do what you want. I'm sure that there's instances where you're going to love having this fighting style, but I can't recommend it. Let me know in the comments if I'm, just totally stupid about this. Somebody out there is dual wielding shields and, blocking arrows left and right like a phalanx or something. But anyway, along with choosing your playstyle defining fighting style, you'll also be granted 2 level 1 spell slots and all the Paladin's level 1 spells. This is a very important level because mixed in amongst those level 1 spells, there are a few real heavy hitters. These are the Smite spells, one of the signature features of the Paladin class. These smites are the main thing people usually bring up when they're talking about Paladins in Baldur's Gate 3, and for good reason. They're very versatile and incredibly powerful. At 2nd level, you will be granted 4 total smite spells. These are Searing Smite, Thunderous Smite, and Wrathful Smite, which are all similar to each other. We'll discuss that here in a second. And then a 4th one, which is Divine Smite. We'll cover that on its own. Searing Smite, Thunderous Smite, and Wrathful Smite are all similar. You'll spend an action, a bonus action, and a level 1 spell slot, and they're going to add elemental damage and or status effects to your swing. If your smite attack misses, it doesn't charge you the bonus action or the spell slot, just the action. So it's the same as just missing a regular swing, not that big of a deal. The 4th smite, Divine Smite, functions differently from the rest. You can activate this like a regular spell, just like the others, but it will also function as a reaction. You go into your reactions menu, you set up these options. You can have it either trigger every time you land a hit, never trigger, or ask you every time you land one if you want to. I always choose to have it ask me because sometimes you don't want the extra damage. Sometimes the guy has 1 health left and you don't need to blast him for 27 radiant damage to kill him. You can just do something else that will do 1 damage and finish him off. But having the option is always nice because sometimes you do need to kill that guy that has 1 health left just because he's about to do something bad. It's also important to note that even though this functions like a reaction, it doesn't actually charge you your reaction when you use it. So if you land multiple attacks on your Paladin in a single turn, each one of those hits will allow you to trigger a Divine Smite if you have the spell slots to do it. The reason why this skill is so powerful and why everybody talks about it so much is because of the way the game calculates damage when you trigger the Divine Smite. You can hit an enemy with a very weak attack like Pommel Strike. Anything that strikes them with a weapon will allow you to trigger a Divine Smite, which could do way more damage than the weapon strike you hit them with. So you can use this to just pile on damage in single turns. Divine Smite also has the potential to trigger other sources of damage that activate upon your Paladin dealing damage. So you can use this to snowball a bunch of effects chaining together, triggering a ton of damage. And you'll notice when your Paladin hits over in the combat log, you'll see like 5 or 6 different sources of damage sometimes where different things are activating. It's really good. At 3rd level, the Paladin will receive another level 1 spell slot, the Divine Health ability, which is a passive buff that makes you immune to diseases. Immunities in this game is always good to have. Anything you can become immune to is just something you don't have to worry about. And you will also be granted a subclass specific bonus at 3rd level, but like I said before, we're going to come back later and talk about those all together at the end. 4th level is going to grant you another Lay on Hands charge, which brings you up to 4 total at this point, since you started with 3, and you'll be able to select your first feat. As always, ability improvement is a great option because the main stats are very, very powerful in a game like this. So if you just want to increase your stats, that's always a strong choice, as long as you understand what the stats are doing. Strength, constitution, and charisma are the 3 stats that you're most likely going to be dealing with on a paladin, but somebody's probably yelling at me in the comments right now about how they're playing an intelligence, dexterity, paladin, whatever it is. Let me know about that too, because I want to hear about it. You also may want to look into some of the specific feats. Some of them provide passive bonuses or crazy effects that you might want to have on your paladin. There's the Warcaster feat, which will help you out pretty dramatically if you're using a lot of concentration spells. It'll help you with your saving throws for concentration spells. Or Shield Master might be interesting to you if you're interested in improving your paladin's spell mitigation. There's tons of options out there. Look through the feats. If you see something that looks cool for your character, it's most likely cool to use. If you pick something and don't like it, go talk to Withers, pay him a couple bucks, respec your character, and change your feats. It's no big deal. As I discussed in one of my other videos, shameless self-promotion right here, you can just pickpocket Withers and get all your gold back after you pay him to respec. So technically it doesn't even cost anything. If he catches you pickpocketing him, he doesn't care. He'll just stand there and let you do it 100 times till you get your money back. There's no negative consequences whatsoever to pickpocketing your money back from Withers. I highly recommend it. He's like a freaking walking loot pinata. Just like the other martial classes, and in fact pretty much every class, 5th level is a huge one for the Paladin. 5th level is like a turning point in this game. This is where stuff starts to get real. The martial classes get the extra attack passive ability at 5th level, which will allow you to make 2 attacks per turn per action from now on. So basically doubles the potential damage of your martial class at this level. And then caster classes also get really strong 5th levels. They get access to really strong spells at this level too, but that doesn't affect your paladin. One of the main reasons why having more attacks per turn is important on a paladin is because each strike, like we said before, has the potential to trigger a divine smite. So more hits is more smites, and more smites is usually always the name of the game when you're playing this paladin. You're going to be stacking up some big damage with these smites. There's also a couple of racial bonuses that are interesting to think about interacting with multiple attacks and different smites, like the half-orc savage attacks ability. When you're playing a half-orc and you roll a critical hit, it lets you roll an extra damage die to calculate your damage. So critical hits already roll double damage die. So let's say you roll a damage ability that does 1d10, okay? Well, if you crit, you'll roll 2d10. So instead of being a 1 to 10 damage possibility, now you have a 2 to 20 damage possibility on a crit. Pretty good. Basically doubles your damage. Well, for the half-orc, you would roll another die. So now it's 3d10, potentially tripling your normal damage. And then on top of that, Divine Smite, when you crit with a weapon attack, the Divine Smite itself will also roll the critical version of the half-orc savage attacks ability, procs with that and rolls additional die for the Divine Smite crit, and you can really drop some nukes on your turns. If you guys know of any other cool interactions like this, racial bonuses and stuff, let me know. I guarantee there's some I don't know about. There's some that I've not looked into, but I always love hearing your guys' different combinations. Along with this extra attack passive, your paladin will also be granted another level 1 spell slot, 2 level 2 spell slots, and access to their level 2 spells. Once again, mixed in amongst these spells is another smite spell, which functions very similarly to Searing and Thunderous Smite from before, except that it requires a level 2 spell slot instead of a level 1 spell slot, and Branding Smite can actually be used with a ranged weapon attack. So all the other smites require a melee weapon hit. This one, you can fire a bow and arrow across the room and trigger Branding Smite with it. It has a chance to mark the target with light magic, preventing them from stealthing and stuff like that. It's not a bad ability to have, just another smite on your bar for sure. You will also be granted another subclass bonus at 5th level, but we're going to cover those here in a bit. So 5th level is massive for paladins. Upon reaching 6th level, the paladin will receive another class-defining feature, their first Aura spell. Aura of Protection is a buff that the paladin will cast on themselves, but it will also benefit any allies within 10 feet of the paladin after it's cast. It's a permanent buff. You click this and it should, in theory, stay on your paladin forever after that point, but you lose the effect if they lose consciousness, There's a couple of different things that'll take these auras off your Paladin, so keep them on your action bar where you can see the ability. If it's grayed out, you can actually mouse over it and it'll tell you whether it's on there. If you're in combat, this is an important note here about auras. If you are in combat and you realize, oh man, I forgot to cast all my auras and now my Paladin's like massively debuffed because I don't have all these passive buffs, it's not that big of a deal. So in one turn, you can apply pretty much all your Paladin's auras. There's an exception. That one's different because it's actually a spell. It doesn't function like the other auras. So as you can probably imagine, these can be really powerful. There's the buff from Aura of Protection will grant the Paladin and their nearby allies a bonus to all saving throws equivalent to the Paladin's Charisma modifier. So as you can probably imagine, that can be extremely powerful, especially when your Paladin starts getting up to really high levels of Charisma. You're going to be adding quite a bit to saving throws, so that's good to have. Excellent. 7th level will grant you 1 additional level 2 spell slot and a subclass bonus that we're going to discuss here in a bit. At 8th level, the Paladin will receive their 2nd feat. So like before, you either boost your main stats with ability improvement or look through more of the specific feats, see if there's something cool that interests you, try it out. 9th level, you're going to unlock 2 level 3 spell slots and your Paladin's level 3 spells. And once again, there's a smite in here. Blinding Smite will allow you to deal additional radiant damage to your target with an added chance to blind them as well. Having access to various different types of crowd control is very powerful because some enemies are going to be resistant or immune to certain types. So there might be somebody that you can't cast Hold Person on, but you can blind them, and this might be a good choice to use in that situation. You will also be granted your final subclass bonus at 9th level, but you guys know the drill. We're going to cover that here shortly. At 10th level, you'll gain your 5th and final Lay on Hands charge. So you end the game with 5. Started with 3, now you have 5. And you're going to get another aura spell. This one, the Aura of Courage, prevents the Paladin and any nearby allies from being frightened. So another crowd control immunity that you just have, set it and forget it basically, and Paladin can't be frightened anymore. It's excellent to have. Upon reaching 11th level, you'll gain your 3rd and final level 3 spell slot, as well as the excellent improved Divine Smite passive ability. This is very different from the regular Divine Smite because this is just an always active passive ability. You don't have to do anything, and automatically it's going to add 1d8 radiant damage to all of your melee weapon attacks from this point forward. This is just a free 1d8 radiant added to your attacks for nothing. You don't spend a spell slot, you don't do anything, and then you can trigger Divine Smite on top of this to do a Divine Smite as well. So it's just icing on the cake here. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached 12th level. You're going to be granted a 3rd and final feat. So as before, buff your main stats or look through the list and pick a feat. I know how much you guys like feat. That covers all the generic Paladin levels, so now we're going to rewind back to 1st level and cover the subclass bonuses and when you get each of those. First up, we have the Oath of the Ancients subclass. You fight on the side of light in the cosmic struggle against darkness to preserve the sanctity of life and the beauty of nature. The tenets of your oath are kindle the light, shelter the light, preserve your own light, and be the light. Oath of the Ancients Paladins have a deep connection with nature, light, and love. You'll be defending these ideas against the encroaching swell of darkness and hatred in the world. When you first choose the subclass, you'll be granted the Healing Radiance Channel Oath ability. You're going to be granted some Channel Oath charges that you can use to activate your Oath abilities on each subclass. Healing Radiance costs a bonus action and a Channel Oath charge and will cause an AoE explosion of healing in a 10-foot radius around the Paladin. Any allies inside the radius, including the Paladin themselves, will be healed for a good amount and then healed again next turn. This can be very powerful, especially if you're able to get multiple targets in it at once. Multiple target heals are very, very good in a game like this. At 3rd level, the Oath of the Ancients Paladin will receive 2 always prepared oath spells, Speak with Animals and Ensnaring Strike. Speak with Animals is incredible, and I highly recommend having access to the spell in some manner. You're probably going to want it to be the person who you talk to most NPCs with, because they're going to be better at speech checks and stuff like that. But there's a couple of animals that you can have conversations with that will actually progress quest lines faster, provide you with shortcuts and information and stuff like that. A great spell to have. You never know when that totally inconspicuous animal in the corner might have a few words of wisdom for you. Ensnaring Strike works pretty similarly to your smite spells. It costs an action, a bonus action, and a level 1 spell slot, and has a chance to ensnare your target with thorny vines that will deal damage to them each turn that they're stuck. There is definitely nothing wrong with having access to more potential crowd control options. Anything you can use to disable or slow your opponents and mess up their plans on their turn, always great to have. When you land a hit with Ensnaring Strike, you can also trigger Divine Smite off that hit, which can lead to massive damage on top of your crowd control. You ensnare them and blast them to oblivion at the same time. On top of these 2 oath spells, you'll also receive 2 more channel oath abilities. The first of these is Nature's Wrath. This will allow the paladin to spend an action and an oath charge to attempt to root an enemy who is within 10 feet of the paladin. This will prevent the target from moving, grant the target disadvantage on their attack rolls and dexterity saving throws, and will grant attack rolls against the target advantage. So, pretty strong way to shut somebody down. You can root them, make them have disadvantage on their saving throws and attack rolls, and give yourself advantage against them. But it costs an action, and the odds of me choosing to spend my action for that turn to root a target in place is pretty low. This early in the game, before you have extra attack, you might make use of this, but as soon as you can get 2 attacks and 2 smites out of that action, it's really hard to justify spending it on this ability. I'm sure there's going to be uses for it though. The second channel oath ability you get at this level is Turn the Faithless. This is a 30-foot radius AoE centered on the paladin and will turn any fae or fiends that it hits. Turned is a status effect that will force the target to move as far away from the caster as possible, preventing them from triggering reactions, and will only be able to use dash as an action on their turn in order to get away from that person even faster. So they have to do everything in their power to sprint away from your paladin as fast as possible. The turn debuff is removed if the target takes any damage. So if you can use it properly, it can be very strong, needless to say. But if you're in combat with a bunch of enemies and none of them are fae or fiends, it's worthless. There's going to be times where you're going to be cursing the spell out for being a waste of space on your action bar, and then you'll run into a room full of fiends and you'll be absolutely ecstatic to have this spell. So great to have when you need it. At 5th level, along with the other massive bonuses, you'll be getting 2 more oath spells, Misty Step and Moonbeam. Both of these spells are great, and you will likely find various uses for both of them. Moonbeam is a beam of moon that will cause radiant damage to any targets that enter it, or if they begin their turn inside the radius, they also get hit. You have to maintain concentration to keep the spell going, and you can move the beam each turn for the cost of an action, but no additional spell slots. So basically, you call down a beam of moonlight. Each turn you can move it around for the cost of your action if you want, and it'll burn targets for radiant damage that are standing inside the moonlight. This is good on various certain encounters where targets are really weak to radiant damage, or radiant damage will prevent them from healing or something like that. It's not a huge area of effect, but you can burn a couple targets with this thing usually. And the fact that you can move it also makes it more versatile. Misty Step, though, is one of the best spells in the entire game. No questions asked at all. For the price of a bonus action and a level 2 spell slot, the caster can teleport to any unoccupied space within 60 feet of where they're currently standing that they can see. They have to be able to see the area they're teleporting to as well. In a game like Baldur's Gate 3, where Tactical combat is involved. Where your characters are standing in relation to other characters is very important. Mobility is one of the most important things that you can focus on. Anything you can use to get your guys from one side of the field to the other, in or out of combat situations where you need them properly, is amazing. Mobility is king in this game, and Misty Step is pretty much the king of mobility. 7th level for the Oath of the Ancients Paladin is also very rewarding. You will obtain the Aura of Warding ability. This one functions just like the other auras that we talked about before, but it grants the Paladin and all nearby allies resistance to damage from all spells. Yes, that's correct. Your 7th level Ancients Paladin is going to take half damage from all spells from now on, basically. I don't think I need to stress how strong that is, but I'm gonna. That's strong. At 9th level, you'll gain your final 2 oath spells, Protection from Energy and Plant Growth. Protection from Energy is a single target concentration spell that will grant the target resistance to either acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage until they long rest or the caster loses concentration. This buff can be powerful. Getting resistance to spells, like I just said, is very strong, but it's a single target concentration spell. I'm not a very big fan of those because there's much stronger ways you can use concentration in most situations. I'm sure somebody's getting use out of this. It's not bad to have. You just probably won't be using it a whole ton. Plant Growth, it's an area denial spell. You choose a circular area and it grows these crazy plants all over the place that will massively slow down anybody that's walking through them. It cuts your movement speed down to a quarter of its normal amount, which means that you're basically going to be stuck in there for forever, and it does not require concentration to maintain this on the ground. The catch here for Plant Growth, because that sounds busted, the catch is that if any fire touches any area on the plant growth radius that you chose, the entire circle of plants burns immediately. It'll do fire damage to the people that are inside of it, basically turning the plants into a fire trap, but the plant growth is gone. It doesn't slow them down anymore. They're just standing in fire now. That can be used as a strategy, or it can accidentally happen, like it's happened to me 400 times in this game, where you cast plant growth somewhere and there happens to be a candle sitting over there that you didn't notice. One of the plants touches the candle, burns all the plants, and your entire plant growth is gone immediately. So, you know, don't be me, be better than me. So to sum up the Oath of the Ancients Paladin in a nutshell, you have all the tools that every paladin gets access to. Those levels we talked about before, everybody gets those. All the smites, those 2 auras we talked about, you're going to get all that stuff. Plus multiple potential crowd control abilities, the ability to speak to animals and do some nature related stuff, and Misty Step and Aura of Warding. Ridiculously strong abilities. So Healing Radiance too, don't forget about that. The Channel Oath ability, Healing Radiance, very, very strong. This is a really powerful subclass. If you want to go this route, you get plenty of utility, plenty of mobility, and you still have all the damage of a normal paladin dropping smites like it's going out of style. Next up, we've got the Oath of Devotion. Following the ideal of the knight in shining armor, you act with honor and virtue to protect the weak and pursue the greater good. The tenets of the oath that you'll be defending are honesty, courage, compassion, honor, and duty. When you first choose the subclass, you'll be immediately granted the Holy Rebuke Channel Oath ability. This will allow the paladin, for the cost of a bonus action and oath charge, to grant their target a buff for 2 turns. The buff will cause 1d4 radiant damage to any enemies that strike the target during those 2 turns. Is this good? It depends. There's certain situations, depending on how many people are getting ready to attack the person you're going to cast this on, where you can get a pretty good chunk of damage out of this. If you got 4 or 5 people that are getting ready to swing on somebody and you hit them with this, you could put out a decent chunk of damage for casting this. But if nobody's close to your guys, or you're not about to take a bunch of attacks on one character, or you don't know who's about to get hit, it can sometimes be tough to justify spending your bonus action and oath charge on this. You might be better off using them on something else. It's not bad, it's just not the best spell there is. You'll probably use it. At 3rd level, the Devotion Paladin will receive 2 more Channel Oath abilities: Sacred Weapon and Turn the Unholy. First of all, Turn the Unholy's tooltip here is incorrect. It says on this page that it turns Fae and Fiends when it in fact turns Undead and Fiends. This is functionally the same exact spell as Turn the Faithless, except it works on Undead and Fiends instead of Fae and Fiends. So, great crowd control, AoE ability just like the other one. You're fighting Undead or Fiends, you can get them to run away from you. Sacred Weapon is a bit unique. It costs an action and an oath charge to cast, lasts 10 turns, and will grant your paladin a buff that adds their charisma modifier to their attack rolls during that time. This will increase your chances of landing attacks by a good amount, but it won't actually increase the damage of those attacks when they land. Attack rolls is just to see whether or not the attack hits. Then you do a damage roll afterwards to see how much damage it does. So this just affects the accuracy, not the damage. You'll also gain 2 oath spells: the Protection from Evil and Good and Sanctuary spells. Protection from Evil and Good is interesting, and it actually has some quest-related uses in the game. There's a couple of times where you're going to run into creatures that are among those that this will protect you from, and you can actually use this to solve certain puzzles from what I've read, and there might be other stuff that people haven't found yet. So this is a good one to have on your bar, and if you feel like it might work for something, if you're just imagining some off the wall, hey, maybe Protection from Evil and Good will help me get through this, test it out and see, because there's a decent chance that Larian made it to where it will help you get through that, and you might be able to cheese your way through a whole quest with this spell. You never know. Sanctuary is an entirely different story. You don't even have to think about when you're going to use this one. Anytime you need to protect somebody from taking hits, you can hit them with Sanctuary. It costs a bonus action and a level 1 spell slot, and it is easily one of the strongest, most important spells in the entirety of the game. That sounds like hyperbole, but I promise you it isn't. I promise. I have completely turned fights around because of this spell on multiple occasions. You got your healer or one of your squishy casters surrounded by enemies that just came out of nowhere, and you can't move without taking a ton of opportunity attacks or something. They're in a really bad position. You can just slap Sanctuary on them, and then they cannot be targeted. That's what the spell does. It makes it to where enemies can't target the person that is affected by Sanctuary at all. You can't target them with an attack, you can't target them with a spell, nothing. The person under the effects of Sanctuary can still take damage. Like, for instance, if someone's standing next to you and you have Sanctuary on you and someone casts a fireball at the guy standing next to you, he can still be targeted, and that fireball is going to explode and blast you because you're standing next to him, but they can't cast a fireball at you. So if no one's standing near you, you're good. I mean, the AI especially doesn't deal with Sanctuary very well. You hit somebody with Sanctuary and they basically just like treat them like they don't exist. If the person that is under the effects of Sanctuary attacks or harms any creature in any way, Sanctuary is immediately removed from them, and it's going to give you a debuff that won't let you receive the effects of Sanctuary again for 1 turn. At 5th level, the Devotion Paladin will gain 2 more oath spells: Lesser Restoration and Silence. Lesser Restoration is a nice cleansing spell that will remove disease, poison, paralysis, and blindness from a creature within 5 feet of the caster. So you basically have to run up and touch them, and it'll cure them of all those things. Having debuff cleanses on your bar is always great. You never know when you're going to run into it. You might catch a disease while you're at Sharess's Caress, and your paladin will be able to fix that right up for you. Silence is a cool spell for multiple reasons. First off, it's a ritual spell. That means that if you cast it outside of combat, it doesn't cost you a spell slot. So, as long as you're not in combat, you can just throw down Silence whenever you want. Now, there are consequences. If you silence the wrong person, they might turn hostile on you, so just don't be throwing it down willy-nilly everywhere, but it won't cost you anything if you do. Why would you use silence outside of combat? Well, there's a bunch of uses, with plenty that I'm sure I'm not even remotely aware of, but you can use it to sneak past enemies without making sound. You can use it to commit crimes that people might overhear from the next room over. You can throw silence down on yourself and be able to get away with crimes that way. Or you can drop it on top of somebody else in order to initiate combat, and they'll start combat out silenced, which is a very weak position to be in, obviously. The spell itself creates a dome of silence, which will prevent creatures inside of it from speaking or casting any spells that require spoken words to cast. It also, and this is very important to remember, it also makes every creature inside of the Dome of Silence immune to thunder damage. So don't forget that and try to drop a shatter on them and waste your wizard's entire turn immediately after casting silence. That's a really specific example, Colo. How'd you think that up? I don't want to talk about it. At 7th level, your oath will grant you the Aura of Devotion spell. This functions the same way as the other auras we've discussed and will prevent the paladin and any nearby enemies from being charmed while it is active. So this is another set it and forget it permanent buff that makes you immune to a form of crowd control. I like it, just like the others. And finally, upon reaching their 9th level, the Oath of Devotion Paladin will be granted 2 more oath spells: Remove Curse and Beacon of Hope. Remove Curse is a fantastic spell that you are going to be really glad at certain points in the game that you have, because some story related things can put curses or hexes on your party members. Beacon of Hope is an interesting one. This is a 10-turn buff your paladin can cast on themselves, and it does require concentration to maintain the spell. And the buff will also affect allies within a 30-foot radius of the paladin, granting them each advantage on wisdom saving throws and death saving throws, as well as guaranteeing that when they receive heals while they're under this effect, instead of rolling to calculate the heal amount, it just guarantees that they take the maximum number that they could from that heal. This is really powerful. If your party needs to be topped up really quickly and you can gather them up a little bit and hit them all with Beacon of Hope, you drop 1 or 2 area of effect heals and hit all of them, you'll put out massive healing numbers because of this spell. Not too shabby. So to sum up the Oath of Devotion subclass, you are the defender of the weak and the helpless. You're the knight in shining armor, striding gallantly across the lands, spreading hope and honesty to the people you meet along the way. And now it's time to go back to 1st level and talk about the final oath that you can select when you're creating your paladin. The Oath of Vengeance. You have set aside even your own purity to right wrongs and deliver justice to those who have committed the most grievous sins. The tenets of your oath are: fight the greater evil and no mercy for the wicked. The Channel Oath spell you'll acquire when you choose the subclass is Inquisitor's Might. For the cost of a bonus action and an oath charge, the paladin can buff themselves or an ally within 30 feet. The buff will last 2 turns and will grant their attacks bonus radiant damage and the chance to daze their targets for 1 turn. The radiant damage added is based on your paladin's charisma modifier, so you know what that means. More Riz means more in quiz. I'm so sorry. At their 3rd level, the Vengeance Paladin will receive 2 more Channel Oath abilities: Abjure Enemy and Vow of Enmity. Abjure Enemy is a debuff you'll cast on an enemy within 60 feet of the paladin. When the spell successfully lands, it will frighten your target for 3 turns, which will prevent them from moving, gives them disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. If the target passes a saving throw against this, they will be slowed instead of frightened for 3 turns, or until they take damage. While they're slowed, their movement speed is cut in half. That's what that does. Vow of Enmity is a pretty cool ability that will allow your paladin to gain advantage on their attack rolls against a targeted enemy for 10 turns. It also only costs a bonus action and an oath charge, whereas Abjure Enemy costs an action and an oath charge. This means that Vow of Enmity can be cast on an enemy directly before you attack them, so you get immediate return on investment for casting it. You cast it, you get to use it this turn, and then whatever happens after that is extra, but you get at least 1 turn of advantage on your attacks against the enemy. Being able to grant yourself 10 turns of advantage against the target can be really powerful, especially if it's a boss fight where the boss is going to last for more than, a few turns. Gaining advantage on your attack rolls pretty drastically increases the chances that you're going to land some damage on that person during these 10 turns. So for anyone who's not aware, advantage means when you go to roll to see if your attack lands, instead of rolling 1 die, you roll 2, and you use the higher number of the 2. So your odds of rolling 2 terrible rolls at the same time is very, very slim compared to just rolling 1 bad one and 1 decent one maybe. So it increases your odds of landing hits. Always good to have. The dice in this game are in charge of your fate, so why not tip the scales towards your side a bit? You can weight it a little bit towards your side. I'm all for it. Along with these 2 oath abilities, you also get 2 oath spells, Bane and Hunter's Mark. Bane is essentially the exact opposite of the spell Bless, which buffs your party members with a 1d4 bonus to their attack rolls and saving throws. Bane's the opposite. It debuffs 3 targets. You can upcast it to have it affect even more people if you use a higher level spell slot, but it debuffs the targets, gives them a minus 1d4 penalty to their attack rolls and saving throws. So same deal as Bless, except it's the minus 1d4 instead of plus 1d4. This is the bad version. You can even tell they have the same icon, they're just different colors. You do have to maintain concentration to keep the effects of Bane on all these targets also, so that's something else to keep in mind. Hunter's Mark is the more aggressive option. For a bonus action and a level 1 spell slot, you can debuff a target within 60 feet of your paladin. Whenever the paladin lands a weapon attack against the target, they will deal an additional 1d6 physical damage. Just adds 1d6 damage to all your weapon attacks when they land. The debuff lasts until long rest, technically, but it requires the paladin to maintain concentration to keep it up. And, uniquely to this spell, if the target happens to die while they're under the effects of Hunter's Mark, you're going to get another skill on your bar that's reapply Hunter's Mark, and all it costs is another action. It doesn't cost you another spell slot to put it on somebody. So basically, if you mark someone to be hunted and then you successfully hunt and kill them, you can mark somebody else. At 5th level, the Vengeance Paladin will get 2 amazing spells. Misty Step, which we've already covered. This one is the teleport ability that I was talking about earlier. Easily one of the best spells in the game. Hands down, no questions asked. The second spell is Hold Person. Hold Person is an extremely powerful crowd control ability that can be used to remove 1 or more humanoid targets from the fight for up to 10 turns. Is it going to last 10 turns? No, it's probably not going to last 10 turns, but it can last 10 turns. It does require concentration to maintain, and the affected enemies are going to be held in place. You're going to see them, they're kind of like, ah! They can't take actions or reactions, and all attacks against them from within a 10-foot range of their body will be guaranteed critical hits. You can upcast the spell by using higher level spell slots to make it affect more targets per spell slot. So you can take quite a few people out of a fight for multiple turns using this spell, which is incredibly powerful. Even if you only get 1 turn of use out of it. If you've ever lost a fight where you got to take 2 turns in a row from your whole team, let me know in the comments. I want to hear about this disaster because that doesn't happen very often. So 5th level is really strong for every class, like we've discussed before, and the Oath of Vengeance Paladin is another one where it feels disgustingly good. 7th level is a different story for this subclass. You're going to be granted the Relentless Avenger passive ability, which This one's kind of strange. When your Paladin hits an enemy with an opportunity attack, which can be caused by a couple of different things, you will gain an additional 15 feet of movement speed on your next turn. Thematically, this ability fits perfectly. You're the guy handing out vengeance left and right like Batman in an Arkham Halloween party. They're attempting to get away with their crimes. What are you going to do? You're going to chase that dude down and you're not letting him go. So you're trying to get to them. You're pursuing them as hard as possible so it increases your movement speed. It makes sense. And there are definitely ways to utilize triggering opportunity attacks on purpose to get use out of this, and you can play around it for sure. So this is a good ability, but it's kind of hard to compare it to some of the other Oath's 7th level abilities. Some of them get really strong abilities at 7th level, and I just don't feel like this one stacks up. It is good though, and when it works, you're going to be glad you have it. And finally, we've arrived at 9th level, where we're going to receive our final 2 Oath-related spells, Haste and Protection from Energy. We've already discussed Protection from Energy before. This is the one that lets you choose an elemental damage type and grant your target resistance to it until long rest while you maintain concentration. I don't think it's the best spell in the world. I don't think it's awful, but you probably won't use it very often. Haste, on the other hand, this spell is special. Remember how I said earlier that I knew you liked feet? Well, these 2 spells right here are probably my favorite feat ever. Okay, I love these things. All kidding aside, haste is absolutely absurd. This thing basically doubles the effectiveness of whatever character it's cast on. There are some things you need to know about haste though. Firstly, what does it do? When you hasten a target, they are going to be granted a +2 bonus to their armor class and advantage on dexterity saving throws, which basically both of those things just mean that they're harder to hit by pretty much all sources of damage. Their movement speed is going to be doubled, and they're going to get an additional action every turn that they're under this effect. Like I said, you're basically doubling the effectiveness of that character for the duration. And don't forget, each action after 5th level grants you 2 attacks per turn. So if you have 2 actions, you get to do 4 attacks per turn. And on top of that, each one of those hits has the potential to trigger a Divine Smite if you wish. So you can basically turn your normal 2 attacks, 2 smites into a 4 attack, 4 smite massacre. Now, for a public service announcement about haste, before you go out there and start casting it all willy-nilly, you need to know how this thing works, because there are definitely some drawbacks. When the spell's effect ends for any reason, whether that means 10 turns went by and it ran out of duration, or you lost concentration by getting hit and failing your concentration saving throw, you cast another concentration spell on accident. If either of these things happens, whenever the spell ends, your character immediately gets struck with lethargic debuff for 1 turn. What does this do? Well, they used up all their energy blending up bad guys in the holy smite storm, and now they're tired, they're sleepy. So for 1 turn, they can't move, take actions, bonus actions, or reactions of any kind. You can't do jack. You are worthless for 1 turn. Alright, Colo, why is that such a bad thing? Why have a whole section of the video warning people about this? Well, if you're anything like me, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. Secondly, I can't even tell you the amount of times that I've forgotten that I had haste cast on somebody and then went and cast another concentration spell. Even on the same turn, I've done it. I've done it so many times, it's not even funny. Like, haste needs a confirmation box that comes up or something. Anyway, they need to put that in there for dumb people like me. What does this look like when it happens? Casting haste on somebody and then immediately ending it will, you guessed it, immediately slap them with a lethargic debuff. This skips their turn. It's just terrible. If you mess this up and you cast haste and then cast another concentration spell, you are going to be cussing like crazy. It sucks when you break haste. But all that being said, probably one of the top 3 or 5 strongest spells in the entirety of the game. Sorcerers are the ones that really love haste, but we'll get into that in the sorcerer video. Stay tuned. Anyway, also, some of your smites require concentration, so you need to know which ones are which. Which smites can you cast while you're concentrating, and which ones can you not cast while you're concentrating on something else? Here you go. Don't do these. Don't be me. Be better than me, travelers. That's everything from the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. You're essentially the judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to punish evildoers. You don't forgive and you don't forget. You literally cannot allow an evil person to go unpunished. Otherwise, it counts as breaking your oath. And you'll be forced into the Paladin's 4th and final subclass, the Oathbreaker. You have broken your sacred oath in pursuit of power and ambition. Only darkness remains to fuel you now. There are no tenets for this one, because there's no oath. You broke your oath, so you don't have any tenets to uphold. You can pretty much do whatever you want as an Oathbreaker Paladin. You can be a straight up evil Paladin by playing Oathbreaker, but critically, for new players, you're going to see Oathbreaker, you're going to say, oh man, well that sounds terrible, that sounds like this is a bad guy. You don't have to be an evil Oathbreaker. The Oathbreaker Knight even tells you that when you first do it. Tells you a story about how he became an Oathbreaker, the first one, tells you what went down with that. He sounds like he's a pretty decent guy, actually, based on what went down in his story. And he tells you straight up, you can use these powers for good or evil. The powers come from a dark source, but they don't have to be used for dark reasons, if that makes sense. The choice is going to be entirely up to you. I think it's actually a really cool idea, going down kind of an evil path, but like forcing yourself towards the good side of things. And I think the Dark Urge good run is another instance of something like this. You could do a Dark Urge Oathbreaker good run, and I think that'd be pretty awesome. You can actually break your oath at pretty much any level. So you might be gaining these abilities one by one while you level up like normal, like we've been discussing, or you might already be 12th level as an Oath of Devotion Paladin and then decide you want to break your oath and try out Oathbreaker, or you accidentally broke it and, you know, now you're going down this path, whatever it is. If that happens, if you're at 12th level when you break your oath, you're going to get everything all at once. You won't have to level up. You're already 12th level. You're just, boom, here you go. Here's all your Oathbreaker stuff. But we're going to go through this as though you are breaking your oath at first level and then leveling up through the entirety of the game as an Oathbreaker. And I'm going to tell you what levels they get certain things at, so you know where your milestones are. At first level, the Oathbreaker will gain the Channel Oath ability, Spiteful Suffering. This is a 3-turn debuff that you can cast on an enemy for the cost of an action and an oath charge. Each turn, while under the effects of this, the enemy will take necrotic damage based on your charisma modifier, and all attack rolls against them will have advantage. This one can be pretty strong depending on your group's composition. If you're able to make the best of 3 turns of advantage against the specific target, this can be insanely powerful. You can get a ridiculous amount of attacks on certain targets with advantage if you have certain people in your party. It's great to have. It is disappointing that it costs an action to use though, because once you get to 5th level, like we talked about before, it's really hard to justify giving up potentially 2 attacks and 2 divine smites in that turn to use this ability instead. Most of the time, slamming all that damage into your enemies is going to be the way to go. The Oathbreaker's 3rd level bonuses are 2 more Channel Oath abilities, Control Undead and Dreadful Aspect. Control Undead will allow the Paladin to spend an action and an oath charge to take control of a targeted undead creature until long rest. The creature will follow the Paladin around like a summoned minion and will attack your enemies when you're in combat, but you don't actually get to control this thing like a pet. Dreadful Aspect will cast a 30-foot radius explosion of fear around the Paladin, potentially frightening any enemies caught in the blast. Once again, it costs an action and an oath charge, but this one can be quite handy because An area of effect crowd control ability under the right circumstances can be one of the most powerful things you can do in a turn. If you're really bad off in a fight and you can scare 5 or 6 people away from you by casting this and save your party member's life, absolutely going to be worth using in those situations. You'll also gain spells that they're not oath spells because you don't have an oath, but they work the same as oath spells. So they're oath spells, but we're just going to pretend they're different because of lore reasons. They're anti-oath spells, oath break spells. Anyway, whatever you want to call them. The spells are Hellish Rebuke and Inflict Wounds. Hellish Rebuke is a reaction spell that will allow the Paladin to blast an enemy with 2d10 fire damage when they deal damage to the Paladin. You retaliate, you blast them back with fire damage when they hit you. If you choose to trigger this reaction and the enemy succeeds a dexterity saving throw, they still take half damage from it. So it's guaranteed retaliation damage under normal circumstances. There's going to be times when that's just not the case. You can also upcast Hellish Rebuke when someone attacks you. If you want to use a higher level spell slot, it'll retaliate with even more damage. That's up to you. Sometimes that's going to be a good idea. It is cool because you can retaliate against ranged attacks. Someone hits you from across the room, you blast them with fire damage. Sometimes your Paladin just can't get over there to hit them, but you can blast them with this and do some damage. And it's not a bad amount of damage either. It's pretty good. Inflict Wounds is a melee range spell that will deal 3d10 necrotic damage to your target, and it can be upcast to deal an additional 1d10 necrotic damage per spell slot level. So this thing can do quite a bit of necrotic damage, and there will be times when putting out that much necrotic damage can be a really good idea, but you have to pretty much be in melee range anyway, and while you're standing in melee range, instead of casting this once, you could hit that person and smite them twice. So you really gotta weigh your options here. Are they immune to certain damage types? Are they resistant to physical damage and inflict wounds might do more damage? Are they super vulnerable to necrotic damage? You got to look at everything, weigh your options, see if this is worth casting. Sometimes it's not going to be, sometimes it might. Sometimes being a paladin is tough because you have too many good options. You have all this crowd control and all this built-in utility and stuff in your spells, but they cost actions that you can use to be a smite turret instead for that turn and absolutely annihilate somebody in a storm of steel and radiant damage. But, throwing a plant growth across the room sometimes is going to be a smarter choice, and if your paladin's the only one that has that, you got to give up the smite storm for that turn to do the plant storm across the room instead. At 5th level, the Oathbreaker will gain 2 more non-oath, anti-oath Oathbreak spells. Crown of Madness and Darkness. Crown of Madness is a single target debuff the Paladin can cast on a humanoid enemy within 60 feet. It lasts 3 turns and requires the Paladin's concentration to maintain. During this time, the affected enemy will attack the creature that's nearest to them on their turn. Whether or not that's one of their friendlies or one of your guys, doesn't matter. Whoever's closest to them, they're going to swing on them. This spell is pretty awesome. It's a form of crowd control, but it's also a potential source of damage from across the room. This thing has a long range, 60 feet. And if you just can't make it 60 feet to do damage that turn, but the enemies are standing right next to each other and you can maybe have one of them do some damage to the other one, hit one of them with it. See if they'll beat each other up while you're on your way over there. Sounds good to me. Sweet, sweet betrayal. It's delicious. Darkness is a great spell for your group to have access to. It can be used in combat to block off enemy sight lines or prevent them from making ranged attacks into or out of a certain area, because you can't use ranged attacks through this. Projectiles won't go through darkness, they get blocked by it. And you can cast a spell on any area that you can see within 60 feet, and it creates a 17-foot wide cloud of darkness in that area, as long as your paladin maintains concentration to keep it up. Any creatures inside the area are going to be both heavily obscured and blinded. And it's important to note, besides some very, very rare exceptions in the game, there's almost no way to see through this form of darkness. Dark vision won't work, potions and scrolls won't work. This is magical darkness, and those things only work on non-magical darkness. There are ways to become immune to blindness and be granted vision in magical darkness, but they are very, very rare items, mid to late game items, or you have to be a warlock. The cool thing is, Lockadins are a thing, which is a multi-class paladin warlock, and you can definitely do that. You can mix and match if you want your paladin to take a step more towards the weird magic stuff. You can kind of go down the warlock route and gain some of the benefits of that. It's all going to be personal preference. If you don't feel like multi-classing, full class paladin is excellent. The Lockadin's good. Sorcerer paladin is a decent multi-class that a lot of people use. These are really strong things, and you can actually do, people call it Sor Lockadin. You can do a sorcerer, warlock, paladin, triple multi-class. There's all kinds of things you can mix and match. They all use charisma as a casting stat, so you've got charisma. You can mix and match these however you want. Just make sure you know the benefits and drawbacks of each level. On top of the combat benefits that darkness grants you, it's also great for open world exploration, because you can cast a spell near a doorway, for instance. If you need to pick the lock of a door and you're standing right in the middle of the main town square in Baldur's Gate or something like that, you don't want anyone to see you, throw down this cloud of darkness, stand in it, pick the lock to your heart's content, walk through, nobody saw you do it, nobody's the wiser. The Oathbreaker has a pretty awesome 7th level ability also, the Aura of Hate. This one functions just like the other auras we discussed, but instead of granting you a defensive buff or some form of crowd control immunity, this one is a purely offensive buff. It will grant your paladin and any nearby fiend or undead allies extra slashing damage on their attacks. The amount of damage will be equal to your paladin's charisma modifier. This is an excellent bonus for your paladin, even if they are the only one who receives it. However, if you manage to get multiple allies to benefit from this, you can add up a ton of bonus damage pretty quickly through this ability. And that leaves us back at 9th level again for the Oathbreaker's final subclass bonuses. Bestow Curse and Animate Dead. 2 spells. Bestow Curse is a pretty cool debuff spell. It requires concentration and you have to be really close to cast it, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it will allow you to choose one from a list of several debuffs that you can put on this person for 10 turns. The effects of these debuffs can be pretty powerful, but once again, it's hard to justify using this in most cases when being in range to use it means you're also in range to slam a hammer down on somebody's head and then divine smite their head into pieces. So your mileage may vary with this one. Animate Dead, on the other hand, you're probably going to use quite a bit. This is like one of the signature things of the Oathbreaker Paladin. You can bring undead people in to help you. You're kind of like, sort of like a Death Knight, not exactly lore-wise. Don't flip out, guys. I understand it's not the same thing, but you're on your way there, right? But yeah, you gain control over undead, you gain bonuses to your undead allies. You could be walking around as like a general of the undead and fiends and leading this evil army against your enemies. It's pretty cool. Casting Animate Dead allows you to target a corpse and summon an undead companion to help you fight. There's various different types of undead you can choose from. Just know that if you pick the zombie, they attack with their bare hands and it doesn't count as weapon damage, so your Aura of Hate doesn't actually add anything to them. I don't know if that's on purpose, but probably, because Aura of Hate is weapon damage. So to sum up the Oathbreaker, this is the paladin you're going to want to play if you don't want to be worried about having to follow the oath requirements, if you don't want to be a good guy but you still want to be a paladin and put out truckloads of damage. I recommend trying it out, honestly. It's not a bad way to go. I think most players, if they're playing a paladin, are going to end up being an Oathbreaker at some point. Most, if not all, players are going to break their oath on accident at some point. You may end up just deciding, well, this is, play the cards where they lay. I got in a bad situation and broke my oath, and now I'm an Oathbreaker. And if you want to go that route, highly support it. If you break your oath and you want to undo it and go back to being a non-Oathbreaker Paladin, talk to the Oathbreaker Knight, and he can basically witness you re-swearing a new oath, and you can become an Oathbound Paladin again. But it costs gold. It starts out costing 1,000 gold, and each time you do it, the cost increases. I think the second time it's 2,000, and then the third time it's 10,000. And I don't know what the maximum is, if there even is one. So, if you're comfortable with it, before you make any dialogue options, you might want to quick save your game and then reload it if it breaks your oath and you didn't intend to. And I know this is a kind of a sore spot in the community, or a topic of heavy debate, save scumming. I get it. I understand both sides. I personally don't have a problem with the way that anybody plays any single player games. It doesn't affect me at all what you do while you're playing. However you're going to have the most fun is the way you should play the game. I don't mind reloading. If I have to do it, I will. I've got so many saves in this game, it's absurd. It's not even funny. And I can make an argument for this that I sort of already started to bring up earlier. Even if you're like super anti-reloading, you believe that every situation happens because of the choices you made and you should live with the consequences of your actions, which I don't disagree with. If you want to play that way, I fully understand and support it. I think that's a great way to play. But the argument that I would make in this specific scenario is that, like I said before, if you were a real-life paladin and you dedicated your entire life to defending the tenets of a specific oath, you would know whether or not you were getting ready to break your oath. You would know, because it would, oh my gosh, it would tear you apart. You would be like disgusted by the idea of it, and then have to actively choose, nope, I'm not following these rules anymore, breaking this oath. In Baldur's Gate 3, sometimes dialogue options have unintended consequences that you're not aware of at the time, and saying the wrong thing can start a fight that you weren't supposed to start, or get somebody killed, and now all of a sudden you're an Oathbreaker because you clicked the wrong dialogue option. It would be different if the dialogue options told you this is going to break your oath, because like I said, the paladin would know that. So I feel like honestly it should, but with the way that things currently are, I feel like just saving and then reloading it, that's the next best thing. No big deal. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. I get it. So with that being said, we've covered pretty much everything that the paladin class has to offer. We talked about the subclasses. We talked about all the spells and abilities. We talked about how many smites you're going to be dropping per turn and how many millions of damage you're going to do. That's an exaggeration. Now, if somebody tells me in the comments that they've done millions of damage with smites, I want to hear about it, and I want to see screenshots, because I think that's ridiculous and I don't believe you. Oh, I'm calling you out. I don't believe you. But if you have it, please show me, because I'm very, very curious. So, which oath are you planning on swearing and defending on your paladin? Or are you planning on playing an Oathbreaker, whether good or evil? Why don't you let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, like and subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you get notified when I post more things, and we'll come back here and do this again here soon. So as always, travelers, I'm glad you got to see me. Do your best to stay alive. Until next time, see ya.